as Nisha was saying, there was a radical way of living the gospel and sharing their experiences that they were living, putting the gospel into practice. And it was a new way of living the gospel. So either people understood it and joined them, or they thought they were crazy. In a few months, many young people were drawn to Chiara, and a number of them, as Nisha was saying, wanted to follow her footsteps. Each of Chiara's first companions have unique stories to tell of how they encountered Chiara. In all of it, you will see how God chooses people from such diverse backgrounds and such different characters to an experience of unity centered on evangelical love. It was after the heavy bombing of the city of Trent on May 13, 1944, that Chiara's family house was destroyed, and her parents and her siblings had to take refuge into the mountains. Chiara, sensing that God had other plans for her, and that together with her friends, they had to reach out to the suffering people in the city, realized that she could not flee along with her family. With a heavy heart, she said her yes to God and let her family proceed to seek shelter. She instead returned to the destroyed city to look out for her friends and to seek the people who were suffering. And there, the experience of putting aside her own suffering to embrace the grief of the others. She was relieved to find her friends all alive, and since most of their families had also fled to the mountains, they began to live in a small apartment together. This apartment was later nicknamed Focolare, which means fireplace in Italian, because of the warmth of the family atmosphere that people found whenever they visited that house. And those who lived in were eventually called Focolarini, bearers of the fire. Among the first companions, there is Natalia, the first one of them. Then there is Dori, to whom Chiara was giving tuitions. Josie, Graziella, who had been training to join the film industry. The two sisters, Gis and Ginetta. Another pair of sisters, Vale and Angelella. Bruna, Marilene, Aleta. Some of them you will hear in the next sessions. They came, after them came others, and also the first men Focolarini. At the moment, only two of Chiara's first companions are still alive. One is Bruna and Palmira. We will let you hear some of them. This is what Josie, one of Chiara's first companions, says about the impact Chiara had on her.
Chiara spoke of her life. She never gave lectures. She herself lived what she said. This is why I followed Chiara, because I understood that the word God, by the way she pronounced it, the way she explained it, was not a word, but a reality. You know, it hurt me here inside. I was so completely taken. Who could ever leave Chiara? Focolare was born. A heavenly invention thought up by the maternal love of Mary to form children similar to her.
Now we are about to see a short clip of Natalia, who was Chiara's first companion, as Doni was saying earlier. When I think of Natalia, I think of holiness, simplicity, and faithfulness. This was my first impression when I met her for the first time here in Mumbai many years ago. For some of you who may not know, Natalia was instrumental in making contact with Vinu Aram's parents, who happened to be the founder of the Shanti Ashram. At that, Natalia met them at an interreligious meeting in Beijing in China many years ago. That's how it all started. And what changed, what brought us in contact with the Shanti Ashram founders was an act of love of Natalia. She made arrangements for a cup of tea for the Aram families, and that's what happened, and now we are reaping the fruits.
Il mio primo incontro con Chiara è avvenuto nell'estate del 1940.
My first meeting with Chiara took place in the summer of 1943. I had gone to confession, and in the end, the priest invited me to participate in a day retreat organized by the Franciscan Third Order. "Come," he said to me. "A young woman who belongs completely to God is going to speak." That meeting revolutionized my life. The reality of God love, which that young woman expressed, you've understood that it was Chiara, literally transported me into God. I went home, and I felt like a queen, loved by God. The fears, the problems I had before had vanished. I was enveloped by the love of God, who took complete possession of me, mind and heart. After a while, a question came to me. How did this light come to me? By which means? I immediately wrote to Chiara asking to meet with her. I went to the school of the Franciscan Order where Chiara was teaching. She welcomed me as if there were no one else in the world in that moment, as if she had nothing else to do. As soon as the children had gone to rest, and you can't imagine how Chiara loved them, she brought me to a parlor, and she asked all about me, with genuine interest, such as I had never experienced before. She listened so keenly that I was able to open up completely and to share my life totally with her. At a certain point, I said to her, "The things you communicated that Sunday resolved all my problems. My life changed drastically. Couldn't you preach these things to the whole world? Because I believe that everyone is waiting for these things. Everyone should know that God is love." Chiara replied, "You know, Natalia, the world is full of sermons. We must say that God is love with our lives." And so I asked, "But how can we do this?" And Chiara, "Let's try to act towards all those we meet in the way we suppose Jesus would act in our place." At this point, an immense horizon opened up before me, and I felt that, yes, this was something I could do, something I had to do, and I was sure of this. But then I asked Chiara, "Will we reach the whole world in this way?" She answered, "Yes." Because, you see, Napoleon, for example, conquered half the world. But what has remained of his empire? Instead, those who follow Jesus continue for centuries to help humanity. And to confirm this, she gave me an example. If a bit of snow breaks away from the mountain, it rolls down and forms an avalanche which can sweep away entire villages. I left that meeting on fire. I couldn't help but live in this way. I had to follow Chiara in this way. And ever since that day, I have always gone to Chiara.
I think Natalia has given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of soul searching, of putting God really in the first place, and our life, which is where we express, we tell that God is love through our lives. We can take a short break through a song, which is also very reflective. It's a song that many of you already know. It's called Yes to You. And maybe through the words itself, maybe we can have our conversation with God on what we've heard.
So many times that I've said maybe, so many times that I've said no, so many laters that never came to pass, but now I give my yes to you. So many times I've hesitated, so many times I've looked away, so many moments that I have had to choose, but now I give my yes to you. Yes to you, I want to find you. Yes to you, yes today. Yes to you, I want to choose you. Yes to you, yes today. So many times I've almost made it, so many times I've looked for you, so many simple words that I let slip away, but now I give my yes to you. Yes to you, I want to find you. Yes to you, yes today. Yes to you, I want to choose you. Yes to you, yes today. So many times that I've said maybe, so many times that I've said no, so many laters that never came to pass, but now I give my yes to you. But now I give my yes to you. Yes to you, I want to find you. Yes to you, yes today. Yes to you, I want to choose you. Yes to you, yes today.
So after we've met Natalia, we'll meet another one of Chiara's first companions, Vale. Vale was one of Chiara's first companions, and you heard earlier, Vale along with her sister Angelella. And Vale was somebody who was fire and light, and she took the charism of unity to many, many countries, from Thailand to Europe to, all over. She also took care of the religious sisters in the movement and many various other responsibilities. Many of you here who are on this call today probably have surely met her, even been in close contact with her. But for those among us here who may not have met her, I can only share with you at the moment What left an impression on me of Vale, and this is from when I was a Gen, because that's when I met her, but that impression has stayed. For me personally, it was easy to see in her tremendous strength, in her gentleness. I recall her relating to us about the time of the war, right? Just as we had seen. She talked about 1944. And she talked about how she, Chiara, Natalia, they would run to the air raid shelters. And around them, under those bombs, there was the war. Love seemed absent. And all that they could take with them was a little copy of the gospel. And Vale would say to us, Jen, we were youngsters, do you know what God gave us in those shelters when all around there was just destruction? He gave us a chance to listen to that voice within our conscience. She always reminded us to listen to that voice. So, we were young, and you know how you feel rather small in front of this challenge, right? We were there to build a united world. Or we could be sometimes feeling probably alone in a city where maybe there were not many other young people, etc. And Vale, in her gentle but firm demeanor, would say to us, Chiara has more confidence in you than you in yourself. But listen to that voice. And then she would explain, she said, that voice of God within us is always simple, it's gentle, but it's full of creativity. It does not permit monotony. Boredom would just be unheard. If you train yourselves to listen to that and let it guide you, you will feel fulfilled because you will find yourself as who you are meant to be, a child of God. Each one is a special piece in God's infinite heart. And there we recognize ourselves as children of a Father who loves us. This is, in fact, I was just recalling this when Dhoni asked, anything. And I actually, like y'all are taking notes now, I actually went to my notes of, what remained with me of Vale. And this is one which is particularly that has been there because what was also strong, very strong, was something that I think she also often repeated, because I've heard it at various times, different times when we had the chance to meet her. Or maybe it's just because it resonated more in me. But Vale would say, listen to that voice because it's already paid. It's all paid. Jesus has paid it all. It's his language, that of love. And she said, it's a language often without words. Yes, we are all different. And God speaks to each one of us with love and has already paid that price. So whenever you are in pain, believe in pain because it is him who has paid the price. And then third thing I recall about her was she would throw us a challenge. She'd throw us a challenge. She told us about how Chiara asked them to burn letters, notes, and things. They were young. They would scribble things, write things that, they felt in that moment. Chiara would have probably asked that not to be attached to it or possibly misunderstood. So they would burn those notes, etc. And then Vale said, Chiara had said to them, you must be living letters. So Vale in turn threw that challenge to us as well. Be living letters wherever we are. Like when you said, even if the gospel is burnt, somebody needs to rewrite the gospel with your life. No? Then she always said, it's all there within you, Jen. Just believe in that voice because the Holy Spirit has an irreversible force. That is something that I recall of Vale, but now Marcelo will help us all to listen to her directly.
My meeting with Chiara, 1944. I wasn't able to go to school because of the war, and so I did volunteer work in a children's hospital, which after Trent was bombed, was transferred to a villa near my house on the coast of Pergine. Angelella, my sister, worked in a bank in the city. She met Graziella on the train. Her family had also moved, after the bombings in Trent, to Vigalazzano of Pergine, a village near our home. One day, I saw Angelella and Graziella coming, and sitting beneath the cherry tree, they told me what Chiara had told them. Look how beautiful the stars are. Each one is different from the other. each one turning in its own orbit without ever stopping, and we see how splendid they are in the wonderful firmament. Look at the earth. So many wars, everyone against everyone else. Why this difference? The stars orbit according to a law, to which they cannot refuse because they are not free. There is the same law in us as in the stars. But we are free, and we can say no. Why don't we try to freely listen to this law within us? Why can't we too live in our orbit, each one different from the others, and become all light and all flame like the stars, and repeat freely on earth as it is in heaven? I immediately listened within. Yes, there was this voice within me. It said to me, do this, do that, do this other. And to my great surprise, I realized that this very sweet request was accompanied by an energy I had never experienced before. I could live what that voice was asking me to do. Everything became unified within and outside of me, and I felt a joy that I could not explain. As soon as I had a free moment, I took the bicycle, and without touching the brakes, I rode all the way to Trent and Port Aquila. I met Chiara. I leaned the bicycle against the wall, ran up to her, shook her hand and said, "Light and flame," the motto she had given us. She gazed into my eyes, and her gaze has remained in me until now.
Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction to this beautiful video of Vale. These are words of light and fire, really. Over to you, Vivek.
Marco Teixeira was the first male to follow the Focolare way of life in 1948. Until then, there had been only young women following Chiara Lubick in her new style of consecrated life. Marco was born in a humble and traditional Catholic family in Trent, Italy. His father was a baker, his mom a nurse, and he had 4 siblings. Marco was 19 years old in 1945 when World War II had just ended, and he was passing through a very deep spiritual crisis. One of his friends, who was a Franciscan priest, invited him to a meeting without giving any details. When a group of young girls entered the meeting room, Marco was dismayed. They were a group of girls who were locally labeled as being a bit fanatical, and Marco had kept his distance from them. In fact, his sister had made friends with these girls and had begun to attend a lot of spiritual retreats and to collect clothing for the poor. Marco's family and Marco himself had thought that she was overdoing it. However, at that meeting, Marco couldn't get out as he was wedged in near the wall. When a little later, Chiara Lubick from that group of girls began to speak, he started to listen, and slowly but surely, he was completely bowled over. Chiara spoke with such intensity about God as love that Marco felt he was receiving something great. His view of that group of girls as bigots was totally reversed. From that moment onwards, Marco, who was an electrician by profession, would go often to do odd jobs or maintenance at the house where Chiara and her first women companions lived. He was drawn by the supernatural atmosphere that he found in that place. One evening, he had to work a little longer than usual to complete some repair work. Chiara was doing some sewing at a table nearby. All of a sudden, she turned in his direction and said, "If Jesus were to come today, he would be Jesus 24 hours a day, whether working, praying, eating, enjoying himself, going along the street, resting, or in the family. In today's world, perhaps he'd be an electrician like you. Marco left the Focolare that evening, deeply struck by this new vision of Christian life. He realized that in order to be a Christian, he needed to be Jesus 24 hours a day. It was as if a new horizon had opened up before him, overflowing with light. Marco felt that Jesus was telling him, if you want to be perfect, go and sell what you have and give it to the poor. Then come and follow me. And he decided that his path was to follow Jesus. In the video that we are about to watch, Marco speaks about the opening of the first men's Focolare. The house they lived in was a converted poultry shed, but the humble bearings of the residents didn't matter. Just like the tiny house of Nazareth in Loreto, which housed Joseph, Mary and Jesus, who was God himself, the mutual love among the first group of men Focolarini brought about the presence of Jesus in their midst. And this struck those who came into that house or into contact with that group of men. In fact, another of the earliest men to enter the Focolare understood his vocation when he was struck by the way in which Marco was chopping vegetables for lunch in the Focolare. Let's listen to Marco now.
The birth of the first men's Focolare. In November of 1948, I was already living alone, in a room that Chiara herself had found in order to follow Jesus' call in the way of the Focolare. The time was approaching for priestly ordinations, the end of June. For this reason, the owner of the house asked me to look for another place, because her son, already a deacon, would spend a period of time in the family after his ordination, and so he needed his room. During this period, two other young men from Rovereto, Fons and Carlo, had come into contact with the ideal, and they too had decided to enter the Focolare. Next to the house where I was staying, there was a small cement house used for firewood, and it has a hen house. I decided to rent it. This was right after the war. It was hard to find a lodging due to the frequent bombings that had destroyed many houses. After cleaning up the house and painting it, at the end of June 1949, we began our life as a Focolare. Finally, there were 3 of us. We could therefore experience the joy of always having the presence of Jesus in our midst. I worked on a train in a local rail station. Fons, although an artist, worked as a house painter. Carlo was looking for a job, but in the meantime he looked after the house.
Dopo un primo periodo di vita comune, ricco di luce e di entusiasmo, eravamo giovani.
After the initial period of community life, rich with light and enthusiasm, we were young, we began to discover our very different personalities, which would sometimes surface quite strongly and shatter our unity. We had made a very precise and radical choice, not so much at the Focolare, but to follow Jesus in the moment in which he had cried out his abandonment, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was really this choice that gave us the strength to overcome the most difficult moments and to rediscover each time the beauty and light of the presence of Jesus in our midst. I remember that in the tiny, cold kitchen we had a green round table, which we had received from Providence. In those rare moments of difficulty, we would sit down around the table and without any fear at all, we had the moment of truth. 2 against 1, 2 against 1. In the end, we were so happy that we felt new. Really, the truth made us free. Free from our faults and shortcomings, and enriched by divine life. I feel that I can confidently say that God reigned in that hen house. God present in our midst. Like crossed pieces of wood, we allowed ourselves to be set on fire by the flame of His love. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, also for the introduction to Marco. But that was in 1940, but I think the calling to the Focolare continues even today. You are a Focolarino. Can you tell us how did you feel this calling to the Focolare life?
I met the spirituality of unity of the Focolare movement a few months after I had finished my BSc. It was a particularly difficult moment in my life, wherein I found myself with shattered dreams. As a result, I withdrew into myself. My relationship with God, which had dwindled while at college, took a back seat. I would go for Mass only on Sundays, just to hold back my mum from nagging me. I would be standing outside the church chatting with my friends, as Mass had lost its meaning for me. It was on one such Sunday, while standing outside church, that I noticed a poster inviting youth for a program that seemed interesting. It was a program organized by the youth of the Focolare. With my friends, we decided to go for it, since we were free that evening, and later to go out for some beers. My friends didn't turn up at the meeting venue. I was in two minds, whether to go in or not, but in the end I decided to have a look. I entered the hall and sat on the last row all alone. I even lit a cigarette, thinking that if someone asked me to put it off, it would be reason enough to leave the hall. But nothing of that sort happened. During that program, I was struck by the experience of Chiara and her companions. In the midst of World War II, which had upset their plans for the future, they discovered and chose God as their ideal, an ideal that no bomb could destroy. The contacts I had later with these young people, the Gen, gradually changed my life. It changed the way I looked at situations, my relationship with family, friends, colleagues, and with God. I sought to spend as much time as I could with the Gen, as being with them made me happy like never before. As a consequence, I started to join them for daily Mass, even though it still meant little to me. After a couple of months, I started paying attention to the readings and the Gospel. Strangely enough, they started to make a lot of sense to me. I realized that I needed to make a new start in my relationship with God. It was then that the Gen shared with me about the mutual love they strived to live among themselves, that brought about the tangible presence of Jesus in their midst. And Jesus in the Eucharist was the source and strength of the relationship of unity among them. It was precisely at Mass that they renewed their unity after receiving communion. I too wanted to be part of this unity, and so I went for confession after a real long time and began receiving Jesus daily in the Eucharist. Little by little, the daily Mass became an important part of my life that brought me into a closer and more meaningful relationship with God and with the others. I would make it a point to go for evening Mass either with one of these young people or to any church in whatever point of Mumbai I found myself due to work. It was on one such evening when I was running for Mass that two thoughts passed through my mind. The first said that I was crazy to run for a Mass after a hard day's work. It was more worth the while to relax and take it easy by having a snack at a restaurant. And after all, daily Mass was not obligatory. Only Sunday was. Though the thought was tempting, I continued to run all the same, as the desire to renew my unity with the Gen was greater. And while running, a second thought crossed my mind. If I was called to spend eternal life with God after death, then why not start right away and follow Him by giving Him the few years I had on earth, which were nothing in compared with eternity? It seemed to me the most logical thing to do. Even though this thought disturbed me a lot, I felt peaceful after offering it to Jesus during that Mass. and asking Him to help me to understand better God's will for me. It was a moment of Jesus' gentle call to follow Him.